In her first program as the new co-host of The Nature of Things, marine biologist Sarika Cullis-Suzuki takes viewers on a fascinating 50 million year evolutionary journey with the world's largest and most magnificent animals, whales. Now, the program will air Thursday, January 11th at 9 o'clock on CBC and CBC Gem. And Sarika will uncover the mystery of the walking whale. Thank you for joining us, Sarika. Lovely to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I must say, for your very first program, you decided to start off with something that was a sizable project. You can't get much bigger than whales. That must be a pretty exciting journey for you. Being on the West Coast, you must be very familiar with these large animals.
Yeah, well, no, it's true. I mean, my background is in marine biology, and so anytime there's a topic related to something ocean-based, I jump at it. And when I heard about this one, I was really excited. And partly it's because I don't know very much about whales at all. I studied fish, and that's where my interests really lie. But whales, I mean, who isn't fascinated by whales? And so this was not only an animal that I don't really know, it was also going back in time 50 million years, as you say. And so, what an opportunity to learn about a species that is now extinct, but gave birth to the modern whale today, and also to go to a part of the world that I've never been before. So, absolutely a really exciting journey.
Well, today I'd like to chat about some of the places you visited and some of the people that you met. I'm going
Great.
to stay away from trying to tell the story because we want people to watch the show. That's what we're trying to encourage people
Won't
to
give it all
do.
away. Okay.
So we don't want to give all the story away, but you did go to some fascinating places. And right off the top, we go down to the Dominican Republic and a gathering of whales. And tell me about that and what it was like to be there in person.
Yeah, well, this was really quite amazing. As you say, I'm from the West Coast, Vancouver Island, and we do have a lot of humpbacks here. And so I'm lucky enough to have seen them before. But this was a completely different experience. This was in warm water in the Caribbean. It was when thousands of humpbacks come there to breed and give birth. They migrate from the Canadian Arctic down into the warm waters. And so it was quite astounding. We went out with some locals and we went in a boat, and I wasn't assuming that we would get near anything. And we were sitting in a boat, and suddenly a big whale comes up and her calf. And I felt, it was like otherworldly because I've never been able to be that close before. But they came up to the boat, and so it was an amazing experience. Absolutely.
Now, does this happen every year?
Yes, yes. And so apparently this is something that people can see, they can go out. You can hear them, which is so remarkable, right? You can hear the of their blowholes, you could hear the slaps of their fins and their tail flukes. So yes, it's quite amazing.
Now, I guess when they leave the Caribbean and start heading back to the Arctic waters of Canada, they disperse. So you wouldn't see them in the same kinds of concentrations.
Yeah, I think that's right. Exactly. So it's an area where you can pretty much guarantee it's a gathering place for them every year. Of course, I don't know how climate's going to be impacting that in the future, but at this point, yes, it's pretty, you can kind of plan around it. Here on the West Coast, we do see them at certain times of the year. And now in the winter, I've never been to Quadra Island where I am right now over the winter break, but I've been hearing them every day during the day and during the night. So they're around. It's pretty neat.
When we leave the Dominican Republic, we take a big jump and we go to the Sahara Desert in Egypt. And that surprised me right off the bat, because it was like, well, what on earth are we doing in the desert? But you went to a place called the Valley of the Whales. Tell us about that. That's a pretty amazing spot.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's called the Valley of the Whales because it's the largest graveyard of prehistoric whales on the planet. And you say, well, how could this be? You're in the middle of a desert. Where are the whales? But of course, millions and millions of years ago, this was a very rich and diverse sea. It was the Tethys Sea. It was shallow, but it was full of animals and many different types of whales. And so, yeah, I was able to literally walk along the seafloor, which is now the desert. I had to take my shoes off because I didn't want to crush any of the bones, but there were bones everywhere. And even to somebody with an untrained eye like myself, I was able to find little pieces, remnants, bones, vertebrae. I even found teeth of different shark species that existed millions of years ago. So it was like being in a candy store, really. It was amazing.
Incredible.
Everywhere you look, there's something.
It must be a real challenge for the paleontologists in Egypt with so much area. It must be a pretty large area that this valley covers.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Wadi Hitan, it's about 200 kilometers. And for me, a foreigner, we got there and everything kind of looked the same. It was just like sand as far as you could see, and there were some sandy structures. But really, there was this one day they decided to look for a whale skeleton kind of in the middle of the desert. And so we were driving and driving and driving into the middle. And then suddenly they just stop and they say, okay, this is a good spot. And I look around like, how did they even know? If they were to vanish, I would have no idea how to find my way out. But it's incredible because the winds, I mean, when they pick up, they really whip you with sand. And at the same time, as they're doing this, they're uncovering fragments of bone, they're uncovering the skeletons. And sometimes this works in your favor, but sometimes it doesn't, right? I mean, you
Hmm.
could be exposing an animal and then suddenly a wind come or a storm and pieces are get blown away. And so they have to work really fast sometimes, but it's such a dynamic place to be working. I mean, I was totally taken with it. I could see why people would want to become paleontologists.
Well, the story goes back 50 million years. And I wonder, geographically, where does the story of the whale begin?
So that's kind of where it did begin in Egypt, right? And this is where, I mean, I don't want to give too much of the show away, but this is where they found the oldest remnants of an ancestor of the current modern whale. And so they think that's about 50 million years ago. And the thing that is so shocking is if you were to look at this animal today, you would never say, oh, that's a distant relative of the modern whale. I mean, nothing about it looks whale-like, right? I mean, it was a land-based creature. It walked on all fours. It had a long snout. It was about the size of a small deer or a large dog. It had hooves and webbed feet. It had a tail. I mean, like, why would you ever think that this was the ancestor of a modern whale? And so we go through all the little pieces and the evidence to kind of show the links.
One of the stunning moments in the program, and people are going to be just so entranced by this, was when you were in the Sahara and you went and visited the skeleton of the king lizard. And I think my mouth dropped open 2 feet. That was an amazing moment. Tell us about your experience with that.
Well, it was pretty unbelievable. Again, if you can kind of picture it, we're in the middle of an open desert, and they bring me to this skeleton. And this was so unusual because you're basically walking in a museum, but it's outdoors, right? And at any moment, if a storm whips up, it could decide to take some bones away. Everything's exposed to the elements. And so we walk up to this skeleton and it kind of snakes along, like the spine is so long. They think that these animals are about 20 meters long
Wow.
and weighed about 6 tons. So you can imagine how enormous this creature was. And they took me up to it and we looked at the different bones and everything and up the head. You could see these huge teeth. They're kind of like incisors and molars. And then they come down the body and they show these tiny little bones and their legs. They're tiny, tiny hind legs. And if you imagine like a T-Rex, right? And his forearms and how we think about T-Rex forearms now is kind of little like useless arms. They don't do much. Same kind of idea with this Basilosaurus, which is the king lizard, as you mentioned. These legs were in the process of vanishing, if you will, over
Ah,
time. When you think about what this animal looked like 50 million years ago, its predecessors, they had long legs. And over time, they spent more and more time in the ocean, and their hind legs became a little bit irrelevant. And so over time, they got smaller and smaller and smaller until they altogether vanished and turned into the modern whale we know today. So I was able to see evolution in action. I was able to see how the former whales had long legs, and then this Basilosaurus had teeny tiny legs, but a really long body. So I was imagining how they evolved over millions of years, which was quite unusual and amazing. And the thing is, this transition happened from land to ocean in a very short amount of time, evolutionarily speaking, between 10 and 12 million years. So they're
wow.
very well adapted to their current conditions.
Well, it really is amazing when you think that whales spend their entire life in the water, underwater. They sleep, they eat, they give birth, and yet they are air-breathing animals. And it just kind of boggles the mind, doesn't it?
Exactly. And that's such a good point because, why would an animal that, as you say, spends all its time underwater, why would they still breathe air? Like those types of questions, I think are really good to think about. Like, okay, why did this animal evolve for this environment? And once you start asking those questions, then it's like, oh, well, maybe there's more to the story. Going back in time, things start to make sense. So it really is kind of like a detective story.
Well, I must say, in this whole process, you met some really interesting people, and we get to meet them in this first show of the nature of things. And the Egyptian paleontologist team at Mansoura University, that's a very impressive group. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about this group.
Oh, I was blown away by this research team. I mean, I couldn't believe it actually. The stuff that they're doing is next level. And in particular, we were interviewing and working with a professor named Hisham Salam, and he had a student, Abdullah Gohar and Sharuk Al-Ashkar, and they took us out into the desert. They explained everything that was going on. And I really felt the whole time I was there that I wish we could have done another doc exclusively on them because they were so fascinating. Sharuk in particular blew me away. She is one of the first female paleontologists in all of Egypt. And so the things that she had to kind of go through to be in that position were quite amazing. I mean, she had to sacrifice a lot, and to be a woman out in the field with exclusively men for weeks on end, she really had to be committed. But as she said, paleontology saved her life, and she was just such a devoted scientist. You could tell everything was so fascinating to her. She was an incredible communicator. While we were there, the president actually honored her for Mother's Day. Like just so many other things going on, and they're doing such exceptional work. So it was a real pleasure to meet them.
It was very evident in the program just how passionate they are about the work
Uh,
that they're doing, and the facilities that they're working in are pretty impressive too. They've got a wonderful setup there.
yeah,
Yeah, it was amazing to see.
it's
Now,
so true.
I was pleasantly surprised to see the Canadian Museum of Nature um, in the program, and their repository. I was quite taken aback that they have an amazing collection of fossils that goes back 100 million years, which is just a number I can't really comprehend. But the people there were very helpful in this story as well.
Yeah, you're right. And I really do encourage anybody who is in that area to go check out the museum because, as you say, it is unbelievable. It's really exceptional, one of the best I've ever been to. And they have these incredible layouts of different organisms, different periods of time, going back tens of millions of years. And they had one exhibit which was really relevant to what we were looking at, which was um, kind of the skeletons of the ancient ancestors of the modern whale all in a row. So you could see 50 million years ago, 43 million years ago, 40 million years ago, how these animals were transitioning to the current modern whale. And that was really helpful because on their own, one skeleton here, one skeleton there, it's hard to kind of picture what's happening. But when you have those transitory skeletons, then you can put it together. Oh, right, like their pelvis is getting smaller, their noses are shrinking, and their snouts are shrinking, and their nostrils are gradually migrating up their heads to their backs, where we know today our modern whales have their blowholes. So things like that are really, really neat. And we were able to look at these skeletons with Mark Ewan, who works there, and he was such a dynamic person and scientist. And he took us into this room, which was basically just hundreds and thousands of boxes, and each box contains a bone. And we were walking through this maze of boxes, and he pulls one off the shelf, and he said, "This was kind of the smoking gun moment when we realized that this ancient ancestor had to be a relative of the whale." And he pulled it out, and it was an auditory bulla, which is part of your ear. And animals have this piece, but in creatures that spend a lot of time in the water, it's really, really thick and distinct. And so when they looked at this animal who was a walking whale, lived most of its time on land, and they found it, they were like, this means it was spending a lot of time in the ocean. And the only other animal that currently has that is the whale. And so it was this like, oh my God moment, right? But it must have been so exciting for them when they discovered it. So I
It's
really
like a
like that.
detective story, isn't it?
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, science is it's full of moments that are like, oh, like frustrating, and only like more questions emerge. But there's also sometimes, if you're lucky, these unbelievable moments where
Hmm.
things kind of fall into place and you actually get some huge information that maybe you're not even expecting. So
Yeah.
I think for him, the excitement, the passion, all of that was really relevant in Mark Ewan.
Well, the work of the scientists and the paleontologists comes through very clearly in the program, and even the use of modern technology. Your visit to the Smithsonian Institute, and they're using modern technology to take the understanding even further. That was an interesting piece of the puzzle as well.
Yeah, and you're right. I never was able to go to the Smithsonian. I wasn't there, unfortunately, but there is some incredible work going on there, and the scientists were highlighted, and they're doing some DNA analysis. You're absolutely right, and they're looking at how certain genes are switched off, like for sweating or smelling or producing saliva and things like that. And so that's another indicator of, oh, okay, these were animals that spend a lot of time underwater. So yeah, I feel like scientists are figuring it out from many different angles with many different tools.
Well, I think viewers will no doubt find the program most fascinating. And this is knowledge gained from 50 million years old. And this all leads to a better understanding of whales today, and maybe a better appreciation of these magnificent animals. I think the show does a really good job on that as well.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, whales are in every ocean, and they're so successful. They have been so successful in their environments. And so it's just interesting to think about how they were able to adapt, right? And changing climates and all that. And so it does make you also think about not only the past, but also the future.
Yeah,
So yeah.
absolutely.
Mhm.
And in this story, we come to a kind of a conclusion on the program, but I'm left wondering, do we know as much as we need to know about whales, or will we continue to find out even more?
I think you probably know the answer to that. Hopefully, we'll keep continuing to find out even more, because I feel like we're just at the tip of the iceberg, right? There's just, that's how science works, though. As soon as you make a discovery, it's like millions of other questions come to your head, right? So
Yeah.
I know, like Mark Ewan, Joy Reidenberg, all these scientists are just getting started.
Well, one of the things that people will find quite interesting is that there are some living relations to whales today, and they're found in various parts of the world, and they'll actually get to understand why whales and these other animals are interrelated.
That's very true. And I was specifically told not to give this one away. But I think that the closest living relative to the whale today would surprise most viewers, and you get to find out on the show who that is.
Yeah. And I'm not going to tell either.
Yeah,
Well,
pretty
all
neat.
this research and work that's being done by scientists and paleontologists, and and as you say, there'll be more that people will learn. And I guess I wonder, is this is this a hopeful sign for the future that the more we know and the more we appreciate what's going on in our oceans, that we might take more responsibility for how we treat them?
I think anytime you look at the big picture, you pause and you zoom out for a second and you think about how we got to where we are. And I think anytime that you do that, you kind of do gain a little bit more perspective and a bit more reverence. If you compare it to these animals to humans, and humans have not been around very long at all, only 170, 200,000 years, right? And if you think about this animal evolving over millions and millions of years to now have our modern whale, it just kind of makes you sit for a minute, right? And you have a bit more awe about our world. And I think it's very important just to take a moment and reflect. And it's very easy to think that the world that we're living right now is always the world and how it's always been, but that's not at all the case. I mean, the world itself is very dynamic and it is changing over long periods of time. And certainly right now we're living through a period where the world is changing fast. So I think, that's also a humbling thought that it took the modern whales that we know about 10 to 12 million years to become who they are today. And right now, the climates are warming so quickly that, do we have time for the next evolution to happen?
Yeah.
These are all big, big questions. And I think absolutely they need our attention. And it's an important time to be thoughtful.
Sarika, thanks for joining me today. This has been a lovely chat. I've enjoyed it thoroughly. And congratulations on the start of a new season of The Nature of Things. Thank you.
Oh, I really appreciate that. And I really enjoyed myself as well. Thank you for such great questions.
Join Sarika Cullis-Suzuki on the trail of the mystery of the walking whale. And that's on The Nature of Things, Thursday, January 11th at 9 o'clock on CBC and the free CBC Gem streaming service. It's a great show.